Morning,
Good
Rabbi.
morning.
So I was
morning.
looking up this concept that we were learning yesterday of the prohibition of filling one's mouth with jolliness, with joking, with laughter. And I see one of the commentaries does ask my question. He says, what does it mean to fill your mouth with laughter? Filling is only applicable to a vessel that's physical. And that you're filling it with something. I mean, your mouth is physical, but you have to fill it with something physical. And here, you're filling it with laughter. It's not really possible. What does that mean to fill it? And he says also, what is the measurement of filling? How do you measure that? So he says that if you're fully joyous with no thoughts of anything else at that time, that would be filling one's mouth with jolliness, and that would be considered a problem. A person should always remember the Churban, and every mitzvah a person should feel, I really haven't fulfilled it completely and as best as possible. And so what it means that a person is prohibited in filling his mouth with joy is that it's unmitigated joy. It's fully, and it's full. There's nothing, no other thoughts at all. And on that, it would be the concept of
Can you give me good morning?
prohibition.
Napkins? I wonder where the napkins? Napkins?
Prohibition of fully rejoicing. That's one commentary. So I don't know if anyone argues on this. This is an unknown commentary in the back of one of the Gemaras that I found that summarizes, that puts together. It's called a malakate. He gathers all the commentaries, and so it's an interesting thought. I don't know if anyone argues on that, but at least he asked the question. How do you calculate full you're fully joyous? So that's one area of
Rabbi, can I ask you?
that we could continue to look into. Yes, Susan.
Okay, when you're saying overly joyous, with nothing else in your mind about anything else, that to me sounds like an impossible concept. That you're always going, as being a Jew, you're always going to remember who you are, where you came from. It's almost like in our DNA. So to be that joyous, maybe they're talking about drinking too much wine.
Okay, that could be an example. Maybe there are people that aren't the same as you. Is that possible?
I'm sure.
Okay.
I'm sure. But maybe it has to do with other things, putting other things in your body is what I'm saying, is drinking too much alcohol.
That would be an example, maybe.
Yeah.
That would be another example. The other thing that, discussion that I see in the commentaries is, when is it permissible? It says, Ba'olam hazeh, in this world, a person is not allowed to fill their mouth with laughter. So what does that mean? So many of the commentaries say that in the time when Mashiach comes, or when there's a Beis HaMikdash, then this would be permissible. And in fact, the Meiri spells it out very clearly. He says, the prohibition is until the time of Mashiach. And in the Shulchan Aruch, it mentions this prohibition. I brought it down yesterday. I read it from the Shulchan Aruch. And there is the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch bring down that possible that it is permissible by a simcha shel mitzvah. If it's a mitzvah, then it would be permissible, which would seem to include a wedding and other types of mitzvahs, which would mean like maybe Purim and so on. Now, the Magen Avraham says that the prohibition is that it might lead why would a person not be allowed to be fill their mouth with laughter? Because that leads, kalos reish, lightheadedness, leads to erva, leads to prohibitions, marriage prohibitions. And according to that, the prohibition would be even in time of the Beis Hamikdash. That would seemingly be it would seem that would be also prohibited. So again, there's two reasons why a person wouldn't be allowed to fill their mouth with laughter. One is to always remember the Chorban, the fact that the Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. And according to that reason, if there's a Beis Hamikdash, then you wouldn't need to fill, you wouldn't have a problem because there is a Beis Hamikdash. The whole problem is you're not allowed to forget about the Chorban, the destruction of the temple. And now you have the temple, so you wouldn't have that prohibition. However, according to the reason of the Magen Avraham or others, that it could lead to sin, lead to erva, lead to sins of relationship sins. So that would seem to apply any time, no matter, even if there is a Beis Hamikdash. The only time it wouldn't apply is when the Yetzer Hara is removed. Now, the Talmidei Rabbeinu Yoina, they seem they bring down also in the back of the Gemara, he brings down this discussion, and he mentions that the whole permissibility that when Mashiach comes, or in that time that the nations will say how great Hashem is, that then it'll be permissible. The whole concept is not that it's permissible then for us to like the prohibition doesn't apply, but that in order to reveal to the world that the greatness, the great miracles of Hashem, therefore we're going to be able to rejoice for Hashem's on. So in other words, it's not that the prohibition is off, it's that the simcha then is an obligation because we have to show the greatness, the great miracles of Hashem, and therefore it'll be to be mefarsim, to reveal, like on Hanukkah where we do Persumei Nisa, so we make public the miracles of Hashem. So the idea is that when that time comes, that we're going to reveal the miracles of Hashem, then we would rejoice in order to bring out the great miracles that Hashem has brought to us. And so that's the way the Rabbeinu Yoina explains it. Just one second. Isaac, who had a question? I heard.
Moshe.
Okay, Moshe, yeah.
It says in Havdalah, I don't have my Siddur with me right now, but I know it says at the end of times that we will all laugh. If I'm not mistaken, something I don't exactly know that part.
Yeah, in the benching. It's in the benching on Shabbos and Yom Tov.
Yes, right.
So yeah, that's the verse. That was the same verse that we're bringing. Yeah, Susan.
Okay, you're saying really what you're talking about is losing your conscience. You don't want to be so
rejoicing beyond your regular, being extra joyous. And on the one hand, it's a contradiction to the fact that we are in exile, and God is in exile. So
okay, all right. Now I get
that is one concept, and another concept is that it's a contradiction to the fact that it could lead you to sin. So, but the Gemara does imply that there will be a time that it will be permissible. And so this is what the commentaries are discussing.
All right, now I understand. When you said exile,
okay,
now I get it.
Okay, good. So now we'll go back to the Gemara. We are on page Lamed Aleph, 31a. And just to go over a little of what we learned. So we had some stories of people becoming too joyous, and one of the rabbis wanted to lessen the levity, and therefore he broke something expensive and caused the people to be saddened a bit. One of the stories is Ravina was making a wedding, and so he broke this glass. Another story is Rav Ashi made a wedding for his son, and the similar story. And the rabbis told Rav Hamnuna Zuti that he should sing, and this was at a wedding of the son of Ravina, and he had this song of woe to us that we're going to die, woe to us that we're going to die. And in fact, interestingly, I saw a commentary that mentions that there were many students at this wedding, many Bachrim that were not married. And so he was trying to encourage them to get married, because Vailon de Misnon, woe to us that we're going to die. And we need to have the future, the continuity. So he was trying to encourage them. That's one of the commentaries gives this little insight. So they asked this Rav Hamnuna Zuti, what should we answer after you? So he said, where is the Torah that we learned? Where are the mitzvahs that should protect us? And then the Gemara said this law about it's prohibited to fill one's mouth with schoik. This was a statement of Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and the statement that he says brings this verse that we recite in the benching. Oz yamale schoik pinu. Then our mouths will be filled with laughter, and our tongues with song. And so when is then? In the time that Hashem will does great things with his people. And the Gemara then mentions that Reish Lakish, from the time he heard this law, he never filled his mouth with laughter. And I mentioned one of the commentaries explains that Rabbi Reish Lakish was really a joker. That was his nature. He was a comedian, and for him, this was a huge thing. Now, this doesn't mean a person should walk around sad and depressed all day. I don't want people to take the wrong idea from this. What it means is that a person should have a seriousness to life, but at the same time, a person should always be happy and be joyous and Makabalas kol adam sever panim yafais, receive everyone with happiness, with joy, and it's a great mitzvah to be b'simcha, tamid b'simcha. We know it's one of the punishments is because we didn't serve Hashem with simcha and tuv leva. One of the in the rebuke of the teichacha in the Torah where there's all the 49 and the 98 rebukes, the two places where there's rebuke. So it mentions over there about punishments come because you didn't serve Hashem with joy. So we have to be joyous, and so simcha. This is not a contradiction to being the simcha, to being with joy, but it's the idea that a person shouldn't either prikas oil, leaving the yoke of heaven and just rejoicing without the yoke of heaven, or just rejoicing and being jolly and frivolous with could lead to sins. And that's really what we're referring to, not that a person shouldn't be happy with who they are and what they're doing and so on. Very important, very healthy to be happy and proud and excited to be able to serve Hashem and to be lucky, to feel lucky that we are Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim, that Hashem chose us from among all the nations. We're supposed to feel proud and happy, and that's how you're supposed to serve Hashem. Hashem doesn't want us to serve Him with sadness and with bitterness. Now, the Gemara then continued, and it mentioned that a person should daven not while studying or being engrossed in figuring out a law or a halacha, but rather a person should daven from halacha psuka after studying a clear-cut law, something that's clear and there's no questions about it. And the idea is that when a person learns Torah, it brings him to simcha. And simcha is important to daven with simcha. And so but at the same time, if you study Torah, that's more complex, very complicated, different opinions, that could cause a person to think about that during davening. So while they're davening, they shouldn't be thinking about the different opinions that they're reading, that they're and the complication of the discussion that they were studying. So therefore, it says that a person should start their davening with something that's clear. And then we had 3 examples of clear laws in the Torah. I shouldn't say in the Torah, clear laws, 3 examples of clear halachas, clear laws that are, the first one is Bnei Yisrael, the daughters of Israel, they accepted on themselves a certain strictness, certain stringency, and that stringency, it actually applies today as well. In fact, most people probably don't even know that the original law of Nida did not obligate 7 clean days. It's become so common, this law, in other words, it's so accepted that most people aren't even aware of the original law, the way things used to be, where a woman theoretically didn't have to always keep 7 clean days, only in certain scenarios. And here, it's the acceptance that they accepted upon themselves is that they always keep 7 clean days whenever they see even 1 drop of blood. Now, the second example was the case of Reb Hoshea, and Reb Hoshea, he mentioned the halacha that there is a way a person could get around taking meiser, taking tithing on produce that he wants to feed to his animals. And the way around it was that if you bring it into your house, into your storage house, with while it has while before it's winnowed, so it has all the chaff on the grain, and if you do that, so you get around. It's not really called dagon, so it becomes so to speak biblically exempt from taking the tithing. And even though rabbinically you need to take the tithing, but you would still be allowed to give the animals food from it even before you tithe it. And the person also would be allowed to eat it on a temporary basis, not as a meal, but as something temporary. And that was the second example. And then the third case was about bloodletting from an animal that is kodshim. And bloodletting from an animal that is holy, that is set aside to be a sacrifice, that the Gemara tells us is prohibited, and the person would need to bring a sacrifice called a asham me'ilos. There are 5 types of ashams, 5 types of guilt offerings. One of them is by benefiting from something that's supposed to be brought as a sacrifice. It's called me'ilah, taking benefit from holies. And this would be an example because the animal is supposed to be sacrificed and you're benefiting from the blood before it is sacrificed. So that would also be prohibited, and that is a example of a law that there's not much discussion of, that there's no arguments, everyone agrees, and that would be an example of a law that a person could learn before they daven. Now, the Gemara continues and it says, we're like halfway, maybe not halfway, we're about maybe 25 lines from the top of the page. Maybe. Right before the two dots. Rabbanon Avdi Kemasnisin. The rabbis did like the Mishnah. And what that means is that the Mishnah said that a person doesn't get ready, stand to daven only with a certain level of humility. Hachna, koived reish. And the brisa that we just learned said that a person should learn Torah, which is considered a type of simcha of mitzvah. And the brisa seems to be a contradiction to the Mishnah. So again, our Mishnah said that you should daven with a certain level of fear and of humility, submission to Hashem. And the brisa that we just read, which talks about davening after learning Torah, so this seems to be an argument with the Mishnah. So the Gemara says that the rabbis followed the Mishnah. Rav Ashi Ovid Kebraisa, but Rav Ashi followed the Brisa. So it seems like there's an argument here. And the question is, who do you follow? And the opinion of the rabbi seems to follow the Mishnah. And now it is interesting because in the Rif, which is in the back of the Gemara, so he brings the wording a little differently. And there he brings that the rabbis followed the Mishnah, and then he brings Rav Shimi bar Ashi followed the following brisa, that a person should daven mitoich simcha shel mitzvah while he is in the midst of simcha of a mitzvah. So the way the Rif has it, it's a little different than the way we have it. So again, we have it that the Gemara ends here. Rabbanan did like the Mishnah, the Rav Ashi did like the Brisa, which mentioned this law of davening, and that you could you daven after you learn Torah. It doesn't clarify, how that argues. Rashi just tells us, yeah, you're supposed to daven after learning halachos. The Mishnah said you daven after being humble. Daven after being humble. Here it says you daven after learning halacha, straight halacha. And it says the rabbis did like the Mishnah. Rav Ashi does like the Brisa. The way the Rif has it is that this statement, really, there's no two dots over here. And we're going to continue, and we'll see how the Rif learned. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis learned, Ein oimdim lehispalel loy mitoich atzlus. Person should not stand to daven while they are depressed, v'loy mitoich atzlus, and not while they're lazy, v'loy mitoich schoik, and not with laughter, v'loy mitoich sicha, not in the midst of a conversation, joking. Sicha here means latzonos, joking. V'loy mitoich kalas roish, and not with lightheadedness. V'loy mitoich dvar metelim, and not with words that are small talk. Ela mitoich simcha shel mitzvah, but rather a person should daven in the midst of a simcha shel mitzvah, which means the rejoicing of a mitzvah, which Rashi tells us refers to verses of happiness, of consolation. So this brisa really takes on a new dimension of this law. Again, the previous brisa said that you learn a halacha psuka, straight law. Anything straight that doesn't have any arguments, that's a straight law. You learn the law, you daven. This brisa says, no, you should daven with a simcha shel mitzvah, which is like consolation of the Torah. So what would be an example? An example of this would be that Hashem took us out of Egypt. You say Shemona Esrei after you read about being redeemed from Egypt. You say Shemona Esrei after saying Tehillah LeDavid, the Ashrei prayer, which means like in Mincha time. Mincha, you say Tehillah LeDavid, you say Ashrei, which is the 145th Psalm. And that Psalm, it's considered consolation and praise because it has things that will make you happy. Like it says, the will of those that fear Hashem, Hashem will fulfill. And Hashem watches all those that love him. And other verses by Ma'ariv, Rashi gives an example, Hashem will never forsake his nation. So these type of verses are verses that one should recite before they do the Shemona Esrei. So according to this understanding, what the Brisa is telling us is that a person should not just jump right into Shemona Esrei, but they should rather have a certain level of rejoicing before they go into Shemona Esrei. Now, how does this fit with the Mishnah? Our Mishnah said you should have humility and fear. In fact, even the Gemara wanted to say like bitterness. And the Gemara gave examples of Chana, who was bitter, and David HaMelech, King David, who bowed, and Berev Chastecha, he was begging Hashem with great mercy. And so how does this fit with this brisa, which talks about the rejoicing, the joyousness of a mitzvah? So the way the Gemara explains it is that there seems to be an argument that there were rabbis that followed the Mishnah, and there were rabbis that followed the brisa. Now again, there's two opinions what it means, the brisa. Did he follow the earlier brisa? Or like the Rif says, he followed the future brisa that we just read now, the brisa that was afterwards that says that you daven from simcha shel mitzvah. Now, yes, Ezra?
Yeah, so when we're saying leit palel here, are we talking about the Shemona Esrei or prayer in general?
No, Shemona Esrei.
Okay, so my question is, all of these are examples of distractions. So why not just say, you should, have no distractions before you pray? Why give all these examples? Because when you give examples like this, someone will say, this thing that I'm doing now is not one of these examples, so therefore it's allowed. So if you were to say general, no distractions as examples being, A, B, C, and D, that would be, to me, I don't know, a little bit clearer.
So
do you understand?
Yeah, I think what we're saying is not that a person might enter into distractions, but it's like a person should know when when it's appropriate to daven, meaning that if they're depressed, if they're in a state of depression, they should try to get out of it before they daven. So it's not that don't get yourself distracted by starting a conversation. It's more that you're in the midst of something, before you daven, make sure to emphasize, make sure to have some simcha shel mitzvah before you start davening. So I think where you're coming from, you're thinking of it more as a law. Don't be distracted. Don't distract yourself for davening. But I think here we're talking more about if a person is in this situation, he should know that he's not in the appropriate mode of davening, and he should make sure to before he davens to remove these type of challenges if he, to the best of his ability. Now, I should also mention that the term ein oimdim lehispalel, I saw one of the commentaries says that there are times that a person, it's very honorable to pray. For example, at the nates, the sunrise. Sunrise is a very respectable time. It's a auspicious time to pray. Nates, you get up right at the sunrise and you daven it. And of course, the earlier, the better. You want to daven as right when the time comes and when it's appropriate to daven, and so on. But when it says "Oimdim lehispalel," don't get up to daven. What it means is that if you have a dilemma, should I daven now because it's an auspicious time, or should I daven later because I'll be able to have the kavod rosh, the hachna'ah, the humility, or here we're talking about the simcha shel mitzvah. This brisa, our Mishnah are telling us don't get up to daven early, even though there's special reward for davening early, but don't do that if it's at the expense of your davening being a better davening. Don't do that if it's at the expense of not having kavod rosh, or at the expense of not having the simcha shel mitzvah, meaning that if it's a question of davening in a more auspicious time or davening more properly, a person should daven more properly. So I don't know if I answered your question, Ezra, but I think it might touch upon. I think I've touched upon it. Did I satisfy your question or not exactly?
No, as I said,
not exactly.
To me,
well, the only other thing that I would,
Rabbi, the only thing I would say is that if you're distracted, it's not the time to pray. That's all.
Well, maybe it also has to do with the fact that the brisa wants to spell out what would be included in distraction, meaning it's not only distraction, it's depression, it's laziness. In other words, these aren't really necessarily terms of distraction. They're also character, activity, feelings, emotions that a person shouldn't have when they're davening. These are, so I don't know if it would work if it said don't be distracted. It's not necessarily saying that that you shouldn't be distracted, but it's what is the mode that a person should be in order to daven. In other words, you're looking at it. You're also translating it all based on kavana. The way my understanding is that you're seeing all these laws as the purpose is that you should have good concentration. Is that the way you're understanding the entire Gemara? It's not necessarily so. Some commentaries say that, but there are different ways of understanding it. It could be that it's in order for your prayer to be more accepted in heaven. And that's another way. In other words, is it for the kavana of your prayer? Is it for your prayer to be more accepted? Is it for the prayer to be called a prayer? It has to be done in a proper way. So it's not necessarily specifically for your intention. There are different ways of explaining the Gemara if you want to delve into the specific reason why the person needs to daven in this specific, why we're so making such an issue out of how you should daven. What exactly is the mechanism? What is the specific reason for these laws? One of the explanations is it's so that your tefillah will have kavana, will have your concentration. But another reason is that your tefillah should be considered a tefillah. It should be considered like there are certain things that would make your prayer not a real prayer. And another way of explaining it is that this is going to make, and these are different opinions in the commentaries, that it's going to make your prayer more acceptable to Hashem. That Hashem will be more tefillosam kabel b'ratzain. It should be accepted willingly by Hashem, that Hashem will accept your prayer. For example, there's a verse that says, El ani yonachei ruach, that Hashem listens to the person who's heartbroken. and the person who's poverty stricken. And so that would be like the acceptance of the prayer is, it doesn't necessarily make their kavanah better, but it makes their prayer is more accepted because of their prayer is being recited from bitterness. So that would be like a understanding of why the bitterness will help their prayer be accepted. So the point is that these are not necessarily words of distraction, but these are issues that will cause the prayer not to be done properly.
Rabbi.
In 1 second, Ben.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think what they're trying to do is tell you this is not just a gathering of people. It's a place that you have to have certain rules, and follow those rules. You have to have concentration, you have to have koved rosh, and so forth. It's not just a social gathering.
Yeah, for sure not. For sure. Yeah. For sure, it has to. This is you're before a king. There's no question. No question. Yes, Susan.
When you're describing what your mindset is supposed to be before you do a davening, it makes sense to when you first wake up, your mind is clear from everything. So maybe that's why that is mentioned that at sunrise, because you're not with life yet. You're not involved yet. And maybe...
Well, we're not discussing the reason why it's auspicious to daven at sunrise. That was a different Gemara.
During the day, when you're involved with your life, I don't see how you can do a proper davening. I mean, it would be very difficult.
So you can daven at sunrise if you find that better, but the idea that everyone is that way, I don't know if that's so. I mean, some people want, some people are able to concentrate, later. I don't know if everyone is in the same boat, but if you feel your davening is better at sunrise, then, that's what you should do. If you have problems concentrating, I'm sure there's many people in that situation as well, that they, have too many things going on. But nowadays, especially, it says in the Shulchan Aruch that we have much less concentration than they used to have in the olden days. So, we just tell you, daven. The time is coming. It's almost the deadline of daven. Every day, there's a deadline when you can daven until, there's the 4-hour deadline, 4 hours in the day, and then there's the midday deadline. And those two deadlines are, the midday deadline is final. Like you can't daven the morning davening after midday today, and today would be like around 1 o'clock. It's exactly in between sunrise and sunset. So that's so the point is that don't expect to have full concentration ever. We are the cell phone generation, the texting generation that doesn't have full concentration. And even before the cell phones, we didn't have full concentration. Our generation is, we're in a generation. The Shulchan Aruch writes that we don't have full concentration ever. But of course, a person should try to daven in a time when they have more, when it's better for them, when they have more concentration. Of course, that would be the appropriate thing to do. Moshe, you had a question. Moshe?
Yeah, I wanted to say that it's also a matter of having proper midot, coming and attending when you're going to daven, you have to have proper midot. And you're a shemayim, it's, you don't want to come in there,
So the whole Gemara was talking about yira, fearing heaven. That's what koved rosh means, or it's connected to the koved rosh is yira shamayim. That's exactly what our Gemara was discussing a little about. Is fear the same, or does it lead to ivdu as Hashem b'yira? Right? This is the Gemara that we were just learning. That it's what's the source of koved rosh? It's serving Hashem with fear. Our Gemara concluded that that's the point here. That it right? So that's it. As you're saying, thank you, Moshe, for bringing up the Gemara that we learned. Yes, David.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on this teaching of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai about not filling your mouth with laughter.
Laughter, yeah.
Because the time to fill with laughter is after Mashiach comes. So I'm just observing that I never heard of anybody in Torah celebrating a person's passing until Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai came along. He said, my passing should be a day of celebration. And the fact that he's the one that said this teaching in the Gemara, and also he's the one that said my passing should be a day of celebration, shows a special uniqueness, or am I reading into something that's not there?
I think it's a beautiful connection that you're making, a very interesting connection. The question is that either there's two ways how you can answer this seeming contradiction. One is that when he said he wants his day of passing to be a day of celebration, either that is not called Yemale Piv Schoit, that it's not called filling one's mouth with laughter, because it's more of a religious rejoicing. It's more of a holy rejoicing. So that's one way of answering somehow, this seeming contradiction. And the other way is that his day of passing is connected to the coming of Mashiach, and somehow this would be a fulfillment of only then, on the day of where he's accomplished so much to make the world a place ready for the coming of Mashiach. Maybe somehow that would permit it only on his day, being that it's like a day of rejoicing that he's, gotten the world to a place that he's revealed the revelations, the beginning of the revelations of Mashiach. So maybe somehow you could say that that's what he's got, deep down, somehow hidden in his teachings, is that this is this is the concept of Oz Yemale Pino on the day of his passing. So that somehow you'd have to develop those two thoughts, but that's what it would seem like.
We still refer to the days of the passing of our Rebbeim as their Yom Halula.
Yeah, okay, right. But we don't make parades and so on, So there's definitely, I wouldn't have questioned any of the other days as days to the extent of Lag BaOmer. I think you have a very good point with Lag BaOmer being such a day of rejoicing. I mean, it's like beyond, beyond regular celebrations. Okay, Ezra, I think, do you have a question, Ezra?
Yeah, well, when he says that the day of my passing it should be a day of celebration, can't we think of it as now we have really have someone who's a Melitz Yosher in front of Hashem, who can force the Mashiach to come, much sooner than who knows.
Right, without him, for sure. There's good addition to what I was saying, that maybe that would be the fulfillment of Oz Yemale Schoipinu, that now he's in heaven pulling his strings to bring Mashiach. Yes, okay, good, very good point, Ezra. Thank you. Yes, Ben.
I thought Shimon Bar Yochai meant to celebrate his life accomplishments.
Well,
one of the things, well,
the idea is that he graduated on the day of his passing. So the graduation day is celebrating his accomplishments on this world, which are affecting us in many ways, benefiting us. And as I was saying, that they benefited us, his teachings, and Ezra added that he's benefiting us by going to heaven and doing whatever he can up there in heaven. But ultimately, he's for sure helping us, helping Mashiach come. So I think David's point is a very interesting point that you mentioned. Thank you for bringing that up. The conclusion of this topic is that the Mishnah said that person should daven with a certain level of kavod rosh, which seems more of a seriousness. In our Gemara, which seems to emphasized the joy, the simcha shel mitzvah, and how we had that statement that said the rabbis did like the Masnisin, like the Mishnah and Rav Ashi did like the Brisa. So on this, the commentaries try to figure out, so what is the final halacha? And
Could I ask you a quick question, please?
Yes.
I'm thinking what you're saying is that the more pious a person is at the time of their death, they have more ability to have Mashiach come sooner. The more, is that what you're saying?
Every mitzvah that a person does helps bring Mashiach sooner. And the more righteous a person is, the more say they have in heaven. And when they pass away, they're even more connected in heaven. And
so a
we
person
definitely
like me doesn't have any I don't have any pull when it comes to my passing to have Mashiach come sooner from my son.
Well, that's not exactly true. You every mitzvah that you do, and it also depends on the hardships of each mitzvah that you do, they all add to the merits that your mitzvahs have. So some people can do things that's very easy for them. Other people do things much harder for them. Their merits are going to be more powerful. And so it's also quality. So it's not just quantity, and there's quality. And we can't judge any person. We don't know only Hashem knows how to judge everyone. But we do know that every mitzvah that you do, you're making the world, preparing the world, making it a holier place, ready for the revelation of the coming of Mashiach, where God will be more revealed on earth when Mashiach comes. So that it's we're all participating in it. But of course, we know that the righteous have, God says the righteous make a decree and God listens, which means that they definitely have a huge say. So
Right.
that doesn't minimize this, that every Jew is considered somewhat righteous. It says, "Ve'amech kulam tzadikim," your nation is all righteous. We all have righteousness. We all are considered, at least in potential, to be righteous, and we have levels of righteousness. So we all have the say, but obviously the holiest of the holies, which maybe you're in, I don't know, I'm not, but the holiest of the holies, they definitely have a big say, and God enjoys their prayers. God gets great pleasure. And but that's what our Gemara is really talking about, at least according to one opinion, is how do we make our prayers more enjoyable to God?
Right.
That's really what we're talking about. We want our prayers to be the most exciting to Hashem, and that's really what our Gemara is discussing. So if you look on the side of the Gemara, you have Tosfos, and the fourth one on page 31a, it says the rabbis did like the Brisa, and Tosfos says v'kavosaihu kaimalon, and we follow them. That's the halacha. So Tosfos seems to conclude that we should follow the Mishnah, that the Mishnah is the main halacha, and then Tosfos says something interesting. He says, therefore, you don't daven with any lightheadedness or schoik or laughter, but rather mitoich kavod reish. And then he says, the simcha shel mitzvah. And you're supposed to daven with simcha shel mitzvah, which would mean, like Tosfos is combining the two answers. So we were learning that it seems like there's a contradiction here. And Tosfos even tells us that the halacha follows the Mishnah, but then Tosfos seems to add in the other view. He says, and it's simcha shel mitzvah. Like, for example, your person should learn Torah before they daven. They should learn Torah, of course, certain types of Torah or certain praises of Hashem. Simcha shel mitzvah, the way Rashi explained, meant like saying Ashrei, saying Psukei de Zimra. We fulfill this probably by all the psalms that we recite before the prayers. But it is interesting that Tosfos over here seems to combine the two at the same time that he's saying that we follow this view. So, and Tosfos then says, therefore, the custom is to say Psukei de Zimra and Ashrei before Shmona Esrei, before Tefillah. So, what the way to understand Tosfos, at least one of the ways to understand this Tosfos is that that the opinion of the Mishnah doesn't argue on the Brisa, but the opinion of the Brisa argues on the Mishnah, which means that the Mishnah holds you need both. You could have both. You could have humility and fear, and at the same time, you could also be reciting praises of Hashem and feeling the joy of a mitzvah. So you could have the humility and the joy of a mitzvah at the same time. However, the Brisa, the opinion of the Brisa, that the rabbi that followed the Brisa, he did not follow the Mishnah. He just followed the Brisa, and he said that's what person should only concentrate on having ashrei and praises of Hashem, and you don't have to have that feeling of hachna'ah, of humility. And on that, Tosfos says, we follow the Mishnah, we have both. The Brisa would be only the Brisa. The Mishnah is both. You could follow the Mishnah and the Brisa. So according to that, one way of understanding Tosfos. Another way of reading Tosfos is that Tosfos is saying we paskin like both. That it's not that there's a contradiction here. Tosfos is saying kavosaihu, like both of them, not like the rabbis. But it's a different way of reading the first word of Tosfos. Kavosaihu either means and like the rabbis we follow, or kavasayu means like both of, like all of them we follow. Two ways of reading the Tosfos, and I've seen both in the commentaries. But basically, according to the second way, basically the Gemara is explaining that really it's not a contradiction, and you could really do like both of them, and that's how we paskin like both of these opinions. Now, I will also mention that the Gemara earlier brought verses proving person should have kavod rosh, person should have humility before they daven. The first verse from Chana, she was bitter. The second verse, King David, Ani b'roiv chastecha, Ani b'roiv chastecha, with your, I will come to your house, and I will bow to your heichal, your holy sanctuary, b'yirasecha, with your fear. So that was the second verse. The third verse was Hishtachvu Hashem b'hadras kodesh, bow to Hashem with cherdas kodesh, with trembling. And then the fourth verse was the final opinion, was serve Hashem with yira, with fear. Now, the Gemara proved wrong the first three, and it concluded with the fourth one, serve Hashem with fear, and that was Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Now, it's interesting because in the Yerushalmi, the Gemara brings two, and it doesn't prove either of them wrong. In the Yerushalmi, it brings the verse of Hishtachvu Hashem b'hadras kodesh, that it means cherdas kodesh, bow down to Hashem with trembling. That's one opinion. And the other opinion is Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha. So the way of serving Hashem, serve Hashem with fear. So the question is, why does our Gemara prove all of those opinions wrong? Even the one Hishtachvu Hashem b'hadras kodesh, and the Yerushalmi seems to be satisfied with both. Another question is that why doesn't all the rabbis find the final verse to be the perfect verse? Ivdu as Hashem b'yira, it spells it out so clearly, and all the rabbis should say that's the right one. Serve Hashem with fear. Why does the Gemara have to go through first opinion, Chana? None of those prove it like the final verse. Serve Hashem with fear. That's such a clear verse that the way to serve Hashem is with fear. That's the way, that's how you should daven, with a certain fear, the element of humility, which basically comes from fear. So why wouldn't the other rabbis agree with that? So yes, Ezra.
I think there's a problem And that was just as you brought out in the Tochacha, it basically says to you that the reason why all these things happen to you is because you didn't serve Hashem b'simcha. And so if you only do one, you've lacked that other aspect, and that means that the Tochacha will come.
So in other words, what you're saying is the rabbis felt that that verse is not clear enough because it seems to be contradicted with another verse, and therefore the rabbis felt that that maybe is not a good source for our Mishnah because there's a verse that seems to say the opposite. Yeah. Or, you know, it's a little unclear. Okay, that's an interesting thought, that it seems unclear. Obviously, the one way of answering that, you know, would be that it's possible to have both, but it's a good point. Good point. The Ezra has a good explanation that it's like it's a little hard to use that verse because there's a verse that contradicts it, so you need to explain what it means. I think that's a nice explanation. I just want to mention, I know my time is basically up, but I just want to mention that the Lubavitcher Rebbe has an unbelievable insight on the whole this whole discussion, and he also brings with his encyclopedic knowledge, explains the different names of the opinions and how that fits with other stories in their life. And he explains and he answers these questions as well. So I just want to share with you the last few minutes.
Can you tell us where that is so we can find it on the internet? Can you
look it up? I don't know if it's translated into English, but it's in his 34th volume of Likutei Sichos. So it's in his the Likutei Sichos chapter 30. I mean, book 34. Okay. And he answers these questions and he explains that Ivdu es Hashem b'yira, serve Hashem with fear. It doesn't tell us what type of fear. There are many levels of fear. And when you just say serve Hashem with fear, it could mean a very simple level of fear of punishment. And the other rabbis felt that that's not what Kavod Reish means. So again, they're trying to, not only are they explaining not only are they bringing a proof what it is, they're really arguing what does it mean, Kavod Reish? To what extent should a person have fear? How much fear? What is expected? And so the first opinion is Vihi Maras Nefesh, that there's a certain fear that Chana had where she was bitter. And that idea that it was that God listens to the prayer of those that are bitter. There's a verse that says El Ani Unachei Ruach, to the poverty stricken. Those are the ones that Hashem listens to, and that is basically, according to that opinion, the Mishnah is telling us Kavod Reish, a person should daven with this Kavod Reish, with this humility, and the reason for it is because your prayer will be much more accepted. And that is the opinion, the first opinion, that it's Chana who had a bitterness of spirit, that the prayer will be much, much more accepted if it's done with that bitterness of spirit. And that means that he's explaining the Kavod Reish, the humility, the feeling of, I don't know if the right word would be lowliness, but feeling low and broken, the humility, that's the understanding of the first opinion. The Gemara was not satisfied with that because that is not necessarily what Kavod Reish really is. In other words, that's not exactly fear. That's like a personal fear, like Chana had, a personal suffering, but it wasn't suffering for Hashem. So the Gemara was not satisfied with that, and therefore brought the verse from David HaMelech. And David HaMelech brings Vani I will bow to you b'yirasecha, which seems like a fear of more serious fear of Hashem, not just a bitterness. So it's talking about a certain level of fear of Hashem, yirasecha, which actually means a level of fear that's knowing Hashem and being afraid of him, which means a very high level of what's called yiras boishes, feeling embarrassed before Hashem, as one would be embarrassed before and feel like all their accomplishments in this world are like nothing. That's the embarrassment. That's the fear of embarrassment. And that's the way David HaMelech prayed to Hashem. But the Gemara says that might be too high of a fear. And the Gemara concludes and says, and the Gemara has a third opinion of it, Cherdas Kodesh, Bahadras Kodesh, which means Cherdas Kodesh, which means trembling. And again, the Gemara says that not necessarily is that the way to translate the verse. And even though that verse also seems like a trembling would be along the same lines as the previous opinion that your whole body is trembling, you're awed before Hashem. And nevertheless, the Gemara felt that that's maybe too extreme. And the final conclusion is, Ivdu es Hashem b'yira, fear Hashem with fear, serve Hashem with fear, and that is the opinion of Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, and that is the final conclusion of the Gemara, that's all you need. It doesn't say what level of fear, but that is actually how our Gemara concludes that is actually the obligation of Koved Reish, that it doesn't have to be the highest level of fear. You serve Hashem even with Koved Reish. And that connects us with who Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was. The Gemara elsewhere mentions that Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak was born, the stargazer said he was going to be a Ganav. And his mother always made sure to keep his yarmulke on. And one time when his yarmulke fell off, he ended up taking a branch off a tree that wasn't his. So what the understanding of that story is that, first of all, a yarmulke causes a person to have fear of heaven. And it causes even a person who's on a low level or who has leanings, tendencies towards being a Ganav. Look at who he became, a huge scholar. But when he was younger, there was a time when there was a moment that his yarmulke fell off, and he ended up taking, in his youth, he ended up taking a branch of a tree. He wanted a fruit from the tree. He took off the branch, and it wasn't his. And so the understanding is that Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak felt that everyone is capable of reaching that level of fear of heaven. That not necessarily is it possible. And not only that, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is the one that says in the Gemara Saita that fear of heaven has not been finished from this world. There still is fear of heaven. Di'ika anad, because I am here. What does he mean, I am here? That even on a low level, everyone still is capable of having fear of heaven. So don't say fear of heaven no longer exists, because di'ika anad, I, who can prove that even on a low level, you could still have fear of heaven. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is the source of this opinion, Ivdu es Hashem b'yira. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is the source of the opinion that you have to reach a very high level of fear of heaven, because he holds that fear of heaven should be on the highest level of yiras boishes, where you see that everything is totally nullified to Hashem, and your whole praying is really just for Hashem's sake, so to speak. You're davening for the holiest reasons. You're davening that not that you want to have all these items, but that Hashem, for Hashem's sake, that's what your interests are, that Hashem should have whatever he needs. And it all is to benefit Hashem. And on that level, it says Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi went to heaven even with his body. He ran into Gan Eden. It says that he snuck into Gan Eden alive. And what that means is his body was on such a holy level that he was able to reach Gan Eden, and that's why he's the source of this verse, Hishtachvu l'Hashem b'hadras kodesh. So what comes out from this is that the conclusion of our Gemara is that Koved Reish, the final conclusion is the verse is Ivdu es Hashem b'yira, that is the serving Hashem with fear, that is the final conclusion of the Gemara Bavli, which is that's good enough. But the Gemara Yushalmi, that's on a much more holier level, so to speak, because it was made in Jerusalem, made in Israel, and it was published in Israel. It was transcribed in Israel. So the Gemara Yushalmi can reach a much higher level, and that's why, according to that opinion, the statement of Hishtachvu l'Hashem b'hadras kodesh, that opinion stays. And the Gemara doesn't prove it wrong. The Yushalmi doesn't prove that opinion wrong, because in Eretz Yisrael, a person could reach a much higher level, the level of hishtachvu Hashem, of having fear of heaven, even on such a high level. And so anyway, there's a beautiful insight of explaining these different opinions and how they fit with the verses. And I guess that concludes our session today. Sei gesund. We'll see you later.
Stay
Have a wonderful
safe.
day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Bye.
Thank you.